The people round about are persuaded that I am, to put it as kindly as possible, exceedingly eccentric. For the news has traveled that I spend the day out of doors with a book, and that no mortal eye has ever yet seen me sew or cook. Hello friends, and welcome to my channel. My name is Haley and I am a Christian wife, homeschooling mother of 3, set out to redeem my very own literary education, which means that I am focusing a ton on classic literature, and I am a very mood and seasonal reader. So in the springtime, I want to read spring books, and I found the perfect spring classic. And that is Elizabeth and Her German Garden, written by Elizabeth von Arnim, who is also the author of the very famous classic, The Enchanted April. And this book was such a delight. It is a fictionalized memoir that was published in 1898 about a wife and mother who finds peace and delight and independence and joy in her garden. She's very much a novice, doesn't really have a clue what she's doing. She just knows that flowers make her happy. Time spent out of doors in her garden with her books is just what brings her joy, and it's what brings her closer to God. And I loved this book so much. After reading it, I feel inspired to just plant flowers everywhere. Just give it a shot. It doesn't really matter if it works out or not. Just try, because it was so delightful. So it's written in a journal style. So instead of chapters, there are entries. So it'll start with like May 11th, and it'll kind of be a diary entry that's just sort of a story or thoughts on her day. It's also full of some of her like life stories that are really hilarious. So our character is Elizabeth, like Elizabeth von Arnim, and there is a point in the book where she travels back to her childhood home, but she didn't really tell anyone that she's coming, so she's like sneaking around, but she's just reliving and reminiscing everything, and it's hilarious. There's also a point where she has some visitors come to stay with her. She has a struggle with that because although she wants to be kind and she wants to host them, especially since one of them is her friend, she really just wants to be in her garden. She wants to sit in her garden and read her books and just enjoy it. And it seems like no one else in her life understands that that brings her joy. So she's married to a German aristocrat, and she doesn't really fit in with that set of society. They kind of pity her a little bit that her husband has left her in this country home, and she's trying to explain to them that no, this is wonderful. I love this. I want this. This is great. But they just kind of brush her off like, oh, you poor dear, just left alone out in the country, alone in a pretty garden. But she loves it. And her husband, who in the book she refers to as the man of wrath. Now this book has a very satirical tone. So she calls her husband the man of wrath, but never in the book is he ever actually wrathful. He doesn't really understand her love for the garden either, but he just kind of lets her be and just kind of says whatever about it. But at this time period, women were not allowed to participate in government or anything like that. So there are a few commentaries from her husband, a back and forth exchange between him and her friend that comes to stay about women's rights at the time. It's very satirical, it's very lighthearted, but things were a lot different then than they are now. So I definitely think that Elizabeth von Arnim was a feminist for her time, but maybe not necessarily in the way we would see that now. So you see a little bit of that in the book as well. Any day of the week, she would 100% pick gardening or reading above housework. And there is a quote in here somewhere where she talks about, you know, if I didn't have anyone else here and dusting was getting in the way of my gardening and my books, I would just get rid of all the furniture and sit contentedly by the fire, never having to dust again. And I thought that was just hilarious, but she is kind of a higher member of society. So in the book, she does have help. She has a gardener who she doesn't always see eye to eye with, which is kind of funny. She has a cook. She has a nursemaid for her children. Her children are kind of running about her every now and then women in and out of the garden. So she has a ton of help, which is interesting because that's not at all kind of what the modern day woman's life is like. And she talks about a parson's wife in this book. So she likes the parson and his wife that live in the town. She calls them intelligent and they're always trying to study and better themselves. But what's funny is her commentary on the parson's wife, because I think it more perfectly captures the modern day woman's struggle of trying to do it all. So at the beginning, she introduces the couple by saying, "Our parson is an interesting person and untiring in his efforts to improve himself. Both he and his wife study whenever they have a spare moment, and there's a tradition that she stirs her puddings with one hand and holds a Latin grammar in the other, the grammar, of course, getting the greater share of her attention." And later on, she goes to say, "Parsons' wives have to do the housework and cooking themselves, and are thus not only cooks and housemaids, but if they have children, and they always do have children, they are head and under nurse as well. And besides, these trifling duties have a good deal to do with their fruit and vegetable garden, and everything to do with their poultry. This being so, is it not pathetic to find a young woman bravely struggling to learn languages and keep up with her husband? If I were that husband, those puddings would taste sweetest to me that were served with Latin sauce." I just thought that is so funny, particularly for me personally. I'm trying to pursue my own mother academia and learning things while also just trying to struggle everything else in life. You know, you have to cook, you have to homeschool the kids, you have to clean your house, you have to do all of these things. And it's really overwhelming sometimes to also find time for pursuits like that. So I thought that was a funny little anecdote and just something interesting, because often reading these classic books, the main female character usually has help within her home. Even in Little Women, when they were supposed to be poorer, Marmee had Hannah. And when Jo March gets married, she has Asia and also a man there to help with their work. Anne in Anne of Green Gables, when she grows up and gets married, has Susan Baker. And I just find it interesting that it's just not like that anymore. Most of us moms are drowning and struggling, but one kind of theme in this book is to put all of that aside, get outside and delight in God's beauty and in the garden. And if that is not the biblical story of Mary and Martha, I don't know what is. And something else she talks about in her journals is that it's not trials that make her feel closer to God. It's actually just beauty and happiness that makes her want to sing God's praises. And I find that to be so true for myself. Yes, trials and perseverance make me a better Christian. However, nothing brings me more delight and praise in the Lord than being out in creation. And that is absolutely what this book makes me want to do. If you pick it up, it's what it's going to make you want to do. And I really, really hope that you love it. And in the back of this book, this is the Warbler Annotated Classics edition. There is an afterword written by Ulrich Bayer that I thought was really interesting, some things he had to say about it. So originally this book was titled A Garden of One's Own, kind of like Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, which came later after this book. He mentions that Virginia Woolf loved Elizabeth von Arnim and kind of likened her to Charles Dickens. I actually would say that Elizabeth von Arnim is closer to Jane Austen in her writing style. I read all 6 of Jane Austen's novels last year. She was my female author of the year. And Elizabeth von Arnim has that very similar style of humor. It's kind of dry, it's kind of satirical, it's witty. You might not would catch it if you didn't know they were being humorous, but it's very intelligent and funny. And the way she crafts her characters with all of just the silly quirks, it's phenomenal. This made me laugh so much and I loved it. But a couple of other things he had to say about her and about this book were, he wrote this: At a time when women were not permitted to own property, vote, hold political positions, keep their children in case of divorce, or run a business except under special conditions approved by men, von Arnim finds contentment and freedom of the imagination even while ensconced in her husband's property. Instead of choosing between revolution or victimhood, von Arnim expands the terms of womanhood, and while accepting the circumstances of her life, develops a mind and occupation of her own. So instead of just hating her situation in life, she takes some agency with their country home that they live in, and she creates this beautiful garden and plans it and delights in it and just really learns to enjoy her life and make it worthwhile and worth living. And I thought that was so beautiful. He also says this: von Arnim was not a radical and yet offered her readers a sly glance at freedom and independence that her contemporary readers clearly relished. So, like I've mentioned before, I would say she was very feminist for her time, but not so bold that she was against marriage or family or anything like that. And the way that she created her own peace and independence still aligned beautifully with everything else and the time that she lived in. And I just think that's so inspiring. I want a garden of my own now after this that I can just sit and read in. There was one point in the book where she said she didn't even want to go fix lunch. So she just ate salad every day. And then she kind of hilariously comments that, you know, only a woman could eat salad for like 40 days straight or something like that, which is just funny and just a testament to her humor. Like I said, I loved this book so much, and I don't think there was a page that I did not annotate or underline something, and I certainly commonplace a lot of quotes in my commonplace book, so I will share some of those with y'all now. It becomes beginners to be humble. I love that. She had a ton of humility in her garden. She made a lot of mistakes. A lot of things didn't work out, but she didn't give up. And I love this next one. Humility and the most patient perseverance seem almost as necessary in gardening as rain and sunshine, and every failure must be used as a stepping stone to something better. Another one. When I got to the library, I came to a standstill. Ah, the dear room, what happy times I have spent in it, rummaging amongst the books, making plans for my garden, building castles in the air, writing, dreaming, doing nothing. And then, dirt is like wickedness, you see, Miss Minora. Its being there never matters. It is only when it shows so much as to be apparent to everybody that we are ashamed of it. This next one, Easter, the real beginning of the year in defiance of the calendar. And then the last, which is probably just one of my favorites. I do sincerely trust that the benediction that is always awaiting me in my garden may, by degrees, be more deserved, and that I may grow in grace and patience and cheerfulness, just like the happy flowers I so much love. Elizabeth and Her German Garden was an absolute delight, and it's also pretty short. This particular edition is under 100 pages, so it would be a great springtime read, even going into the summer. The journal actually takes place for a full year, skipping months here and there, just kind of sporadic journal entries, but it follows her entire year, and it was just so good and interesting, and I really hope you give it a try, especially if you love The Enchanted April. And if you haven't read The Enchanted April either, I highly recommend that one as well, specifically in the month of April. We're currently doing the Enchanted April read along, and I'm doing some live discussions for some of the chapters, so I will leave the details of that in the comments below. But please let me know in the comments section if you plan on reading Elizabeth and Her German Garden, or if you've already read it. And also let me know if you have a flower garden or not, or if you would consider starting one. That's all I have for now. Lord willing, I will see y'all next time. Happy reading, friends.